Welcome to The American Story. Stories about all the things that make America the country we know and love. Thank you for subscribing to the American Story podcast on your favorite podcast app, leaving a 5-star review on that app, and sharing these stories with family, friends, and neighbors. Thanks to you, we are reaching more listeners every week. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. I call this one Uncle Tom's Cabin. Isabella Jones Beecher was outraged, like many of her Boston neighbors, by the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law of September 1850. The law was an essential part of the Compromise of 1850, which aimed to keep the country from destroying itself over the issue of slavery. Replacing the Fugitive Slave Law of 1793, the new law made it easier for slave owners to file claims on alleged runaway slaves, created more federal officials to enforce the law, and denied the fugitives' right to a trial by jury. Most infuriating and humiliating to anti-slavery opinion, the law required citizens in free states to assist in the recovery of fugitive slaves under penalty of stiff fines or imprisonment. This forced these citizens to be active collaborators in the institution of slavery, which could no longer be seen as an abstract evil in faraway, strange southern slave states. Isabella was fully occupied looking after her 11 children and had no public platform from which to do anything about this outrage, but she knew someone who might be able to do something. Her husband's sister, Harriet Beecher Stowe, then abiding in Brunswick, Maine. Stowe had been writing and publishing articles and tracts and sketches for years. Maybe she could write about this. So her sister-in-law wrote her a letter. "Now, Hattie," she wrote, "if I could use a pen as you can, I would write something that would make this whole nation feel what an accursed thing slavery is." When Stowe received the letter, according to the recollection of one of her sons, she read it aloud to her assembled family, and when she got to this passage, she rose up, crushed the letter in her hand, and said, "I will write something. I will if I live." Harriet Beecher Stowe was approaching 40 years old, the 6th of 11 children of a well-known New England preacher, wife of an impecunious theology professor, and mother of 7 children, one of whom had died in infancy in a cholera epidemic. She described herself as a little bit of a woman, about as thin and dry as a pinch of snuff. She was about to become an international celebrity. Stowe wrote to Gamaliel Bailey, publisher of the Free Soil newspaper The National Era, published in Washington, D.C., proposing to write what she thought at the time would be 3 or 4 sketches painting a word picture of slavery. 3 or 4 sketches turned into more than 40 episodes of a story, coming out weekly from June 1851 to April 1852, called Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. It is a story of a slave, Uncle Tom, who is strong, brave, and Christ-like in his goodness. He is sold eventually to a cruel and terrible slave master, who has Tom whipped to death because he will not betray 2 runaway slaves. The novel powerfully affirms Christian faith and the principles of the American Revolution, condemning slavery not with philosophic arguments, but with word pictures working on the imagination. The words and images seem to flow through Stowe. When the series was issued in book form in March 1852, it sold 3,000 copies on the first day of publication, and the demand grew. Her publisher proclaimed, "3 paper mills are constantly at work, manufacturing the paper, and 3 power presses are working 24 hours per day in printing it, and more than 100 bookbinders are incessantly plying their trade to bind them, and still it has been impossible as yet to supply the demand." Within a year, Uncle Tom's Cabin sold 300,000 copies in America. In Great Britain, it sold 1.5 million copies. It was translated into dozens of languages and became the best-selling novel of the 19th century. Frederick Douglass enthusiastically promoted the book in his new newspaper, describing it as a work of marvelous depth and power to arouse a justified hatred of slavery. But it was widely condemned by pro-slavery newspapers and banned in parts of the South. Stowe was denounced as a radical abolitionist ignorant of the truths about slavery. She received threatening letters. Someone even sent her the severed ear of a black slave. Stowe responded to her critics by writing another book, The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in early 1853, containing an annotated bibliography of her sources, pointing to hundreds of documented cases similar or identical to those portrayed in her fictional story. She wanted the world to know that her fiction was based on fact and showed in reality what an accursed thing slavery is. The facts were plenty outrageous and alarming by themselves. The enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 continued to compel citizens to be active collaborators in the institution of slavery. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 permitted slavery in territories where it had previously been forever prohibited. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision in 1857 declared that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. And the logic of that decision made clear that soon no one would have the power to prohibit slavery from any state. It is impossible to know how much outrage Harriet Beecher Stowe's fiction added to these outrageous facts. But one of the most widely repeated legends in American literary history is the greeting the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin supposedly received from President Lincoln when she visited him at the White House in late 1862. So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war. Thanks for being part of the American Story. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. I encourage you to visit our website, theamericanstorypodcast.org, to learn more about these stories and how you might support them. That's theamericanstorypodcast.org.